It's December the 15th, 1956, and Endeavour is leaving Wellington for the Antarctic. We, that's the members of the New Zealand expedition, are doing the last-minute scramble. On the shoulders of Sir Edmund Hillary, leader of the expedition, and Captain Kirkwood, skipper of Endeavour, is a big load of responsibility. Endeavour was formerly the supply ship John Biscoe, used by the Falkland Islands Dependency in polar waters there. She's 850 tons and manned by the Royal New Zealand Navy. Providing her is the Navy's contribution to the expedition. Our route's almost due south. Somewhere about here we pass through a belt of pack ice, then through open water again to the Ross Sea. There we'll establish a winter base. The big advantage of the Ross Sea is that it's generally ice-free in summer, and ships can get closer to the South Pole there. Ed Hillary and the captain spend the time figuring out our schedule, and Bob Miller, the expedition's deputy leader, and Murray Ellis are planning what we do when we get there. Passing the time of day with Pup, Jan and Craig was soon our most popular pastime. That's Liz with her litter. 3 days out and Pukaki and Hawea join us. These New Zealand Navy frigates have been escorting Britannia with the Duke of Edinburgh aboard. We picked up mail for them at Bluff. Whoop! You could hear the moaning on Pukaki from here. A drop in the temperature, and we're running a sweep to see who spots the first ice. That's it. Real nose drip weather now. Our first iceberg's quite an excitement, but in this weather it isn't beautiful, just cold and menacing. The radar picks up Scott Island and we pass to the east of it. It was discovered by the Scott expedition of 1902. The pack ice isn't far away now and Pukaki and Hawea are turning back. Their skins are too thin for the pack. As well as keeping us company, they've been doing research work on the Antarctic current, ocean depths and water temperatures. It must be a bit disappointing for them not to be able to go any further. Hey! Hey! This is what we've been looking for, the pack ice. Our speed through the ice can affect all our plans. If we get held up, it's going to shorten the time we'll have for unloading and establishing the base. The first lot's about 2 foot thick, and we chew through that easily enough. Watching the bow smash into it never gets tiring. No two pieces of ice seem to break the same way, and there's always the thought, will she or won't she make it? Pack ice breaks loose from the Antarctic shore every summer and gradually drifts north. Finally, it all melts in the warmer waters. We do get stuck several times, but not for long. This time we stopped to take on ice for our water tanks. No, it's not salty. It was fresh snow once. We push on again, literally, and our progress is quite good. With the right amount of finger crossing, we should soon be through the ice and into open water again. The sight of the first of the local inhabitants, a crab-eater seal, steps up the excitement. We feel we're getting near. The end of the pack ice, and we're in the Ross Sea. But this storm's dampened our enthusiasm for polar voyaging. Nearly everybody below is sick, very sick. We're lucky we're out of the ice, but there's still the worry that our deck cargo will get smashed. We're almost hove to. When the storm drops, our first thought is for the dogs. We haven't been able to get near them for 3 days, but we find they've come through it all right. In perfect weather, we sight Mount Erebus with a trail of steam from its crater, and its neighbor, Mount Terror. It's an exciting landfall. We're now 13 days out from New Zealand, and Erebus and Terror, which are on Ross Island, are near our destination. We won't be alone in Antarctica, for in July 1957, the International Geophysical Year begins, and 11 countries are establishing 60 bases there. Our New Zealand party is one half of the Commonwealth Polar Expedition. The other half is a British party led by Dr. Vivian Fuchs, which will come overland from Varzil Bay. When the two parties meet, they'll both travel back to Ross Island. Our big surprise is to find ice over the Sound. We expected clear water, but the big storm has apparently blown it out to sea. It's very beautiful, but it could trap us. The Americans, hearing from us about the ice, send out the big icebreaker Glacier to lead us into Butter Point. That solves our problem, and we relax, picking out the landmarks as we go. This is where we are. Here's Ross Island with Mount Erebus and Mount Terror. This is the Antarctic mainland ringed by mountain ranges. Behind is the polar plateau with the glaciers flowing down from it. South of Ross Island extends the Great Ice Barrier. Glacier comes into the edge of the ice off Butter Point and we follow. On board her are 16 members of our expedition who've come down with the Americans. There wasn't room for everybody on Endeavour. And the locals are there to welcome us too. We put a line overboard and tie up to railway sleepers which the ship's company have sunk into the ice. Last year's survey decided on Butter Point as a suitable site for the New Zealand base. From there, the sledge teams could travel up the Ferrer Glacier to the polar plateau. We're putting ashore dog and tractor teams who'll reconnoitre a trail to the site of our base. Meanwhile, Glacier is giving us more help by smashing out the ice to make a safe harbour for us. Until we get a report from the team saying they've found a good route, we won't unload our stores. The quaint Adelie penguins give the finishing touches to the Antarctic scenery, and they seem to be as curious about us as we are about them. We do our best to establish friendly relations. When the reconnaissance parties moved inshore, they found that the ice conditions now make it impossible for the tractors to reach the base site in safety. Rear Admiral Dufek, in charge of the American Operation Deep Freeze, suggested a site at Pram Point. The American base is at Hut Point. Captain Scott had wintered at Cape Evans, Sir Ernest Shackleton at Cape Royds. Ed Hillary and Bob Miller look at the site, and Pram Point it is. There's plenty of room for our huts and radio masts, and it's only a 2.5-hour haul from the ship for our tractors and sledges. Butter Point would have been about 7 hours. In honour of Captain Scott and his party's heroic trip to the pole, our base will be known as Scott Base. Next day, January the 11th, 1957, we're officially established. Our exact position is determined and the places for our huts laid out. The Americans have generously given us more help. They send over bulldozers to level out the site. Their cooperation and friendliness is really magnificent. Meantime, Endeavour crosses over to Butter Point again and picks up the tractor reconnaissance party. Getting the tractors on board isn't difficult, but picking up the dog teams 2 days later is extremely tricky. They're afloat on an ice floe and it's breaking up. The pieces of ice are getting smaller every minute. You can't last long in that water and killer whales might show up. With everybody safe again, we say goodbye to Butter Point and leave it to the seals and the penguins. In the harbour off Hut Point is 56,000 tons of American shipping. Endeavour berthed there, and we get down to the business of unloading. Two-thirds of our supplies have been brought down by the American transport Private John R. Towle, and that's got to be unloaded too. We now concentrate on the job of getting our stores from ship to base. Crossing the sea ice is dicey because, strangely enough, the weather's too warm. The ice keeps opening up with a temperature between 30 and 40 degrees. We've had to change our road several times on account of that. We work in shifts around the clock. We can't say night and day, for it's daylight all the time down here in the summer. It's easy to lose count of the days completely. At Pram Point, the ground's frozen solid from 18 inches down. A few small explosions help in getting our foundations into the hard ground. To set the foundations, the formula's simple. No concrete's required. Melt some snow, pour the water into the ground, and it freezes solid again. The two planes, a Beaver and an Oster, were the last equipment to come off Endeavour. In providing the Oster and the personnel to fly and service the planes, the RNZAF is making an important contribution to the expedition. Air reconnaissance changed our original plans. It was found that the Ferrer Glacier was not a good overland route to the polar plateau, but that the Skelton Glacier looked ideal. So a base is to be established at Skelton Inlet for the dog teams. Then they are to explore the route up the glacier on foot and find a site for the 270-mile depot on the polar plateau. The laying of the depot on the polar plateau is an operation with dog teams and planes. One dog team sets off from base to cross the barrier ice to the Skelton Inlet. This is the way both Scott and Shackleton went. Then two more dog teams are flown into the Skelton Inlet, and from there they'll travel on foot up the Skelton Glacier. Several flights are made to the inlet, and Mount Discovery becomes a familiar landmark. For dog teams, it's 200 miles across the ice to the inlet. The plane gets them there in about an hour, and then brings in more supplies. Provisioning dog teams with aircraft certainly changes polar exploration. If Scott's party had had planes, their story would have been different. About 9 days after the two dog teams left the inlet, the plane contacts them on the polar plateau. A shuttle service then begins to lay the plateau depot. Flights take the plane up the glaciers and through the ring of mountains that form the coastline. These glaciers are huge, some wider than New Zealand's glaciers are long. From the air you realize that Antarctica is a cold, forbidding land. We're now over the Ferrer Glacier. Then over the enormous snowfields that feed the glaciers. Finally, the polar plateau itself, stretching away for hundreds of miles without a break. They're 8,000 feet above sea level here, and with a 48-degree frost, it's more than cold. As soon as the stores have been flown in, the men and dogs will be flown out. Back at Scott Base, the radio masts are being pulled into position. The trial assembly of everything before we left New Zealand has simplified construction and is saving endless time. Everybody knows exactly where everything goes. The huts are prefabs, of course, but even they'd been given a trial put together before we left. To connect all the huts so it won't be necessary to go outside during the winter, there'll be covered ways of corrugated iron. It looks as if the winter party is going to be pretty snug. We begin to receive visitors. The first is Admiral Wright of the US Navy. He's very impressed with our quarters and our equipment. Like our good friend Rear Admiral Dufek, he thinks we're well set up, and New Zealand has a lot to be proud of. Though there's a lot to tidy up outside, things are pretty shipshape inside. Our radio's in contact with New Zealand, and today they're lining up for the transmission of the first radio picture. It's quite a history-making event. Some of us make a bit more history by calling up our people back home on the radio telephone. The folks just won't believe we're still in Antarctica. The stove's in commission too, so we've no complaints. There've been hardly any, but right from the word go, everybody's pulled his weight and then some. We've come to do two things during the summer: to build and establish Scott Base and to lay the first depot on the polar plateau. We're going well. Good planning, good organization, and plenty of cooperation have paid off. With the fine weather, more and more ice drifted out of N.W.O Sound until it's mostly open water. Some of us take the opportunity of going down on Endeavour to Cape Royds to look at Shackleton's hut. It stood the gales of 45 years pretty well, but some windows have blown in and the winds have played havoc inside. We clean it up as best we can in the short time we're there. While we're at Cape Royds, we visit the Adelie Penguin Rookery. It's the southernmost one known and was studied by Shackleton's party. We take a census of the inhabitants. The chicks are almost full grown and are just losing their down. This one's trying to persuade Mum to feed it. Some of the males are still trying to woo a mate with presents of stones, but the girl's not interested. Our advances to a full-grown chick don't get much encouragement either. While we're there, the sea freezes over and our dinghy has to be pulled to Endeavour by line. We also call at Cape Evans and climb the hill to the memorial to members of Shackleton's expedition of 1914. Below is Endeavour, Scott's Hut, N.W.O Sound and the shores of Ross Island. Scott's Hut is not in such good condition. Being the most accessible from the sea, the litter of previous expeditions lies around it. This is a 1914 model tractor. Now that things are fairly shipshape at the base, the scientists can spare time for research work. The biologists set out on a seal branding expedition. Though the distance is only about a mile, it's fairly tough going. Between the sea ice and the barrier ice, there's a strip that's been squeezed between the two into pressure ridges. It's full of crevasses and holes, so crossing it's not easy. The seals are lying on the barrier ice, and through holes in it they come and go in search of fish. We take another census. The idea of branding is to find out whether the seals travel far. The expeditions of the other countries have been informed of our research and have been asked to report if they find any branded seals. Weather observations are important, and this sunshine recorder is a unique kind, as it's made to record 24 hours of continuous sunshine when we get it. The summer days of 24 hours daylight are disappearing, and we have our first sunset when the sun sinks for a few minutes. Close to Scott Base is the American airstrip for Operation Deep Freeze, and from it the Globe Masters are on a shuttle service to the South Pole for supply dropping. They kindly take some of us along for the ride. As part of their International Geophysical Year investigations, the United States is maintaining a base right at the South Pole itself. The pilots are on target with the supplies, and we're trying to see the huts that'll mark the South Pole. And there they are. Now the last letters home are being written by members of the winter party, for it's time for Endeavour to return to New Zealand. Staying at Scott Base for the winter are 23 men. 17 of us belonging to the summer party are going home. It's quite a hilarious farewell. The winter party are leaving the ship to go back to Scott Base. In the spring, they'll lay more depots across the polar plateau. Then in summer, they'll set out to meet the British party from the other side of the continent. They move away from the ship. A few men going into the long night of Antarctic winter. When daylight comes again, they'll be ready for the next step of their great Antarctic adventure.